Righto, Money Miners. She's Friday.
Must be Friday.
It's Friday and it's nearly December, so there's probably going to be a beer in front of me every day of December. Why the hell not? Boys, how we Trav.
It's like the Matty Michael advent calendar.
Yeah.
You open a beer every day at lunchtime.
Same beer. I'm on the dingo now. I'm converting.
You're a convert, mate.
I'm converting from the Swan, I think. Supporting WA liquor.
Good on you, mate.
All for Spinner, because tell you what, that bloke's a GC. Anyway, mate, Trav, you can disclose the AGM you were at yesterday.
I can indeed. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that one. It was, I think, the most, action-packed or exciting or, the biggest AGM on my calendar that I wanted to attend. It was the AVZ AGM.
Three very talked about letters in mining these days, A, V and Z.
Yeah.
Right, a couple of REM reports got voted down. You boys are going to hone in on which shareholders didn't like what the bosses were getting paid.
We sure are.
Yeah. What, JD, you've gone heading across to Europe, our European man.
Yeah, we're going to touch on the Critical Raw Materials Act, which got a bit of an update, and it relates to an ASX company as well, so we'll tie that in. And then we're going to get into MinRes and their confirmation of Bold Hill. They've kept it awfully quiet on their front, but we're not going to stay quiet on it. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with a bit of an update on the situation at Cobre Panama.
That Critical Raw Materials Act, I had a good read of that this morning. So,
Did you?
I feel like that's a lie.
Of course not. That's what you're here for, JD. Oh, boys, bit of underground carnage to start with. Check this out.
This is what you're here for.
Have a look at that.
What is that?
Do you know what's happened there? Just headbutt the microphone, JD.
I have
Excited.
literally no idea.
That's a reamer bit, and with mesh because of the rotation. Just if you're bloody scaling or something, and the rotation just grabs it and tip for the jump operators out there. If you want to get out of that, reverse rotation your way back out.
That's not something you'd be familiar with.
She'll unwind. That was Matty in the first few years before I developed the craft. Now that mesh there is possibly an old piece of DSI mesh that has been just wound up.
Gotcha.
And just absolute carnage.
I hope you got a better analogy than a Band-Aid this time, Matty.
Yeah, mate. Oh, mate, because look, we've talked about them before, like leading supplier of ground support for the underground mining industry. I'll give the catalogue. They've got split sets, they've got GUI bolts, MD bolts, MDX bolts. They're the super bolts, cable bolts. And lads, mesh, just bloody normal mesh. They've got woven mesh, chicken wire mesh straps, bloody mesh everywhere. That probably used to be their mesh. Mate, DSI, I actually see a bit of a parallel between DSI and Brooks Airways. Can you see how that one's going to tie together?
Get the job
done.
done.
DSI have products to support the absolute shittest ground you can find. Like Brooks can land on the shittest airways.
Well done.
DSI have essentially they take shit ground and their products can turn it into good enough ground to walk under.
Yeah.
Good enough.
Yeah.
Good enough.
Pretty real good actually. Yeah. But there's always the factor of the jump operator putting the bolt in. DSI don't actually supply the jump operator that comes with the bolt, so there's a bit of variability who you get there sometimes. You'd say DSI. I'm doing DSI. You can use these slogans if you want. DSI provide frontline ground support for frontline jump operators, but they also provide frontline ground support for real shit jump operators. What a service, boys.
I got to say, mate.
What a bloody service to the underground mining industry.
You've done well there.
Mate, they're all across Australia. We've got to go to Kewdale in Perth to get our bloody split set from the manufacturing facility. They got one in Newcastle, Brisbane. No, have a look at the joint. Have a look at the innovation, the technology. No backyard bloody workshop shed here. She's pretty impressive.
It's like a robot factory.
Oh, mate, and tell you what, heading up to Christmas, trucks and planes and shit going everywhere. Like, you can never get your mail. I would recommend to mining companies, get in early and chuck in another DSI order because you don't want to run out of that shit. Doesn't that piss everyone off when you got no bolts and mesh on site?
Big time. Well done, mate.
Now a bloke that isn't pissed off in the industry, Seamus Murphy. Never. He's like,
He's happy. He's smiley. He's got a good smile.
he's happy anytime, anywhere, mate. They announced last week, anytime exploration. They now got geological consulting services. You got Sarah Dye here. Look at her with big Seamus. Bloody, look at the handshake. She looks like she's got a good handshake. You
does.
never trust a person with a piss poor handshake, boys.
I trust Sarah.
Mate, Sarah can pump out a JORC report now.
Yep.
You might even get a picture of Seamus in it. But, mate, they're all over it. So, mate, big Seamus he's putting the call out to the companies, again, leading up to Christmas. Get your exploration in order. Get your affairs in order, mate. Anytime they can sort out your exploration incentive scheme applications, because that sounds a pain in the arse. Mate, that's where the government matches your spend on your drilling and your assays. Mate, compliance reporting, data analysis and target generation. Like, when you read that stuff, you're like, ugh. That's what you got Seamus at Anytime Exploration for. As we say, anytime, anything, anywhere, any altitude, any uranium level, any day of the week, boys.
Next time we read an updated mineral resource, we always read back to front, which means we're reading the JORC tables first. I'll be wondering, did Sarah from Anytime write this?
I know. I want to go straight to the back and just see a big picture of Seamus. Seamus, I will call out. I did talk to someone at the pub the other day, a fan of the show, and they're like, look, I don't know Seamus Murphy, but I can't get him out of my head after all the sponsorship. So it's bloody working.
Love it.
Righto, the AVZ AGM, which I thought was supposed to be no media, but how did you get in?
Mate, when there's a will, there's a way. That's all I'm going to say on that front. But I managed to get in there. I attended the AVZ AGM, and there's a lot to unpack here. And to start with, I think I'll just talk about what was I expecting, right? Honestly, I don't even know what I was expecting. But I noticed a few things in the lead up to this AGM. Really, really, really engaged shareholder base attending this AGM, and rightfully so, because AVZ obviously hasn't traded for a long time. A lot of shareholders care about what's going to happen from a governance perspective. There's a lot of other factors and influence involved. There's a bunch of it's a bloody shit show in some ways, and it's hard to decipher what's going on there. But it was the AGM of the calendar to attend, I reckon, Matty. And the things I noticed in the lead up. There were 22 resolutions up for vote at this AGM. 21 of them were related to the election or re-election of directors to the board of AVZ.
And most of them were, it was only 3 of them were election of current directors, was that right?
A couple more than that.
A couple more, but majority were election of new directors, people putting themselves forward.
Correct. It's a staggering number to see at an AGM.
I've never seen that many resolutions.
No wonder you were so fucking late yesterday, waiting for all the bloody resolutions to get passed.
It was a 2 hour, over a 2 hour AGM. So also in the lead up, there was a coordinated effort for 3 of those directors put up for nomination by a shareholder called Fat Tail Holdings. Those 3 shareholders being Peter Hulich, Michael Carrick, and Ty Ludbrook. This coordinated effort appeared costly. There was a website titled Make Monono Great Again.
Oh, Yep. I only got that link sent to me 95 times or something.
There was online marketing, there were videos, all of that sort of stuff. It appeared like they had, proxy solicitation firms involved, legal, the works. It was very, very coordinated, the campaign for those 3 nominees, which I'll come back to later. The really interesting thing, it was also revealed in the AFR that proxy advisor ISS recommended that Michael Carrick, so one of those 3, be voted onto the board of AVZ, and AVZ's existing chair, John Clark, to be voted off. And both of those were resolutions which were contrary to the board's recommendation to shareholders. So they're the things you notice in the lead up, right? I think those are some of the important facts. The AGM was set to start at 2 p.m. at Novotel in East Perth. And I was walking over there, and as I'm walking over there, I'm reading on my phone a link that was actually just sent to me minutes before that. And the link is this article in the West, which basically said that, that it's going to be a closed door AGM. You're not allowed in. And so I'm thinking, I'm bloody walking there. It's 40 degrees. I've spent the last 15 minutes walking, and it's 40 degree heat. I'm done this all for nothing. Bloody hell. But Mate, I got in there. When there's a will, there's a way, all right? There's, Inspector Gadget style.
Like KCA, mate. No is not an option.
I got myself a seat in the second row from the back, and unfortunately, I missed the first little part of the AGM, but at least I got a seat, right? And there's one other important element of the proceedings, which is a little unorthodox for AGMs, and that's that everyone had to turn their phone off on the way in. Like, there were big signs. You had to show that you were turning your phone off, and you couldn't use it. No recordings, no cameras, nothing. It all had to be off during the AGM.
And I hear it was a pretty full house. I mean, AGMs are usually a bit of a snooze, and there's maybe 15 people there.
If you're lucky, including
including the board.
They should have had it in the bunker at the White House. It sounds bloody that sort of level of intensity.
This one, the room was full, right? It was like I think it was a South ballroom, and there were 200 people in there, and most of them you could see they had the blue sheets that they'd already voted in the lead up. At the front row there, obviously facing everyone else, was the board of directors. You could see the middle two seats there up the front being Nigel Ferguson and the chair, John Clark. And sitting right next to the AVZ chair, I spotted big shot corporate lawyer James Nichols of DLA Piper. In the crowd at the front right, you could see, there was a small contingent of what was immediately apparent to me as being the Fat Tail Holdings contingent. Michael Carrick was down there. Sitting amongst that contingent, I spotted another one of Perth's top corporate lawyers, Scotty Gibson of Thomson Greer, amongst them. And to round it out in that Fat Tail contingent, I also spotted Martin Bennett, Perth's top litigant, in their corner as well.
Oh yeah, we know him.
So
Friend of the show.
Anyway,
So the AGM, by the sounds of it, feels more like you've gone into the Supreme Court.
Mate, it was, even though it was an AGM, you're right, it felt like a courtroom. There was three of Perth's biggest names in law all there, which you'd never really see that at an AGM. And all of their associated minions of all of their representative law firms were there in their suits as well amongst the crowd. So that was the lay of the land. Now let me tell you about the feel of the AGM, right? And I'm there as an outsider. I don't have shares. I don't have skin in the game. But just as an outsider, I'll tell you what it felt like. Have you ever been to Optus Stadium for a West Coast Eagles home game?
I have.
fanatical.
The way I describe it to any international listeners, if they don't know what it is,
when they were winning.
when they're winning. Yeah, you're right. Sure, there might be in the back corner like a small pocket of interstate supporters over in the corner, but there's an army of devout West Coast fans amongst you in the crowd, all rooting for the same thing, cheering for their home team and booing the opposition. That's what the AGM felt like. The AVZ shareholders in that room appeared relatively united together. And there were two things I thought they were united on. One being their support for the existing board and their strategy, and the other one was their absolute disdain for the Fat Tail Holdings contingent.
Wow.
There was serious hate in the room towards them.
Was there much heckling?
They're absolutely not. I wouldn't say heckling,
Not
but
5-inch level?
they're not. No, it wasn't. And the thing with 5-inch, right? This is a really important
That was
difference.
just
I
one
noticed.
bloke.
Yeah, but 5-inch, right? The disdain in the room was towards the board.
Yeah.
The disdain in this room was not towards the board. It was towards the
People wanting to get on the board.
yeah, this like group of shareholders who the other shareholders didn't think were aligned with them.
You told me somebody passed you a party popper as well, mate. Didn't get the chance to set that one off.
They 100%.
They did.
They did. Mate, I'm
Legit.
sitting there, yeah, like in the second back row, and the guys in the back row, like, hey, mate, are you pro board? And I was like, mate, I'm pro shareholder. Like, he passes me, take this, and he gives me a party popper, and he's like, yeah, when it's revealed in favour of the board, we're going to pop these together. It never happened, but anyway, I thought that's an interesting thing. But I'll tell you a few other like observations, and then I'll tell you the results. Right. So a few other observations. The board's piece was heavily scripted, and they stuck to that script. The Fat Tail contingent had their chance to ask questions. Michael Carrick was the only one of those nominated 3 directors to talk. But the questions were also dished up by what appeared to be their legal contingent. Martin Bennett asked plenty. Scotty Gibson piped in too.
Which side was Bennett on?
Bennett, to me, appeared to be a representative of the Fat Tail contingent.
Okay. Yeah.
And to me, it didn't feel like their questions really landed. The crowd certainly wasn't impressed. The board let them ask as many questions as they wanted. They referred to their and whenever the board was asked questions, they just referred to their booklet of prepared answers to read from them. From time to time, you could see their lawyer, the board's lawyer, James Nichols, advising them pre-response. Every word was clearly very thoughtful about what to say, and I think also what not to say. And when it came,
so they were advised nearly every time they spoke in a way.
I wouldn't say every single time, because there was a booklet of responses to potential questions that they were clearly referring to. And I think from time to time, if something might have not been in the booklet, there was a little bit of,
wow, so very,
guidance.
very prepared.
Super prepared, right? Super prepared. That was just an observation. So when it came to the vote on the resolutions of the 21 directors up for election or re-election, the nominees actually weren't allowed to respond to the questions put forward by shareholders. My interpretation of the shareholders' line of questioning was that they were asking questions which were highlighting their dissatisfaction with the fat tail nominees. They'd ask questions and they'd kind of try and point out what they believed to be a bit of a flaw or an incompatibility with why those nominees should actually end up on the board. One shareholder literally made 5 statements, and then the chair was encouraging them to ask a question, and he goes statement, and then he goes, and my question is, I don't have a question, and everyone just laughed.
Yeah, right.
So although the board actually they allowed Michael Carrick to a right of reply when some questions related to him, I thought that was noteworthy. Here's a staggering fact, right? I've never seen this. I don't know if I'll ever see it again, but 69% of shareholding voted. That's a huge number. That's a huge voter turnout.
By number or by percentage?
Percentage, yeah. I think it was even higher by number, but I could be wrong about that. Shareholders clearly, they're super engaged, right? So with the and even when you've got that proxy advisor ISS encouraging Michael Carrick to be nominated, it was always going to be, it's going to take a giant turnout from the retail shareholders to have that resolution actually not pass. And they got that turnout. So the results, this is, I think, the juicy bit, right? All of the board's recommendations passed in the end. In general, the board recommended resolutions gathered about 67% support. You can see the impact of the proxy advisor on the votes against John Clark and for Michael Carrick, where it gets a bit narrower than that. And
there was one dicey one though, wasn't there? The REM report was roughly 52, 53 for, and
correct.
And
there were some legitimate questions from shareholders about the REM report that related to historic remuneration and cash bonuses. The big takeaways for me from all of this, Jens, is that the Make Monono Great Again, the MMGA campaign failed. And that's not without a lack of financial firepower behind that campaign. I mean, we're talking Martin Bennett, Scott Gibson, proxy solicitation firms, media, all of that is not cheap at all.
That'd be bloody a lot of, that's be nearly 7 figures, in the 7 figures, wouldn't it?
I don't know.
Who knows? But it wouldn't be cheap.
Not cheap. Absolutely not cheap. And so why did the Make Monono Great Again campaign fail, right? I'll tell you why I think they failed here. I think it's not because they didn't have some valid points. Some of the points were actually valid points. It's because they failed to convince the AVZ shareholders that they had their best interests in mind. There was a narrative that formed really early on once the Make Monono Great Again campaign emerged, and that narrative consistently linked Fat Tail to Chinese entities. And Fat Tail, the Fat Tail and the nominees, they could never shake that narrative. Shareholders didn't believe them that they were on their side, and that was evidenced in that vote there.
And it's really noteworthy, the retail component here. This is, I think we'd seen 21,000 shareholders in this stock, which is a huge amount, and it's just dominated by retail in comparison to a company that would have been 2.6 billion when it went into halt as well. So you really had to win over the people to have any hope, right?
Big time. It's not an activist campaign where you actually just have to influence the proxy advisors to win. You had to bring the retail shareholders along with you. And I think that's the big lesson for shareholder activism here. To have shareholders on your side in an activist campaign, it's got to be genuinely grassroots, especially when you have an incredibly active retail base like AVZ does. Activism falls flat if those retail holders don't believe you're on their side. In fact, they'll turn up in spades to fight against you, like I saw yesterday.
And we learnt an awesome new word along the way. We're all the wiser for this one. What is it, Trav?
This is a brilliant word for the phenomena where a campaign is dressed up to appear grassroots, but really it isn't. It's called astroturfing.
There you go.
And I think the vote result shows clearly that the AVZ shareholders thought Make Monona Great Again was astroturfing. I'll finish with this pretty funny picture I saw on Twitter from one of the AVZ shareholder contingent. So the statement is, guess who's left the building? The only one smiling is the solicitor, who will get paid regardless. And you can see walking together there. You've got Michael Carrick, you've got Peter Hewlett, you got what I think is Ty Luddick as well, and then the only one smiling there is Scotty Gibson.
Scotty's got a real smiley sort of face. I've met him once, and he's just a real happy-looking character. So yeah, he might have been upset on the inside, but I don't know. That's the type of guy he is. Yeah. So
awesome work, mate.
Trav, can you sum up quickly what this fat tail were proposing to do in contrast to the AVZ incumbent board that was different?
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole that I think we'll have to save for a later day if I go there. But I think we'll keep it to just the AGM. But I think there's lessons to be had in engaging with shareholders, shareholder activism, and the likes. And I think, in due course, like, we'll tell the full AVZ story about all of the interests and all that sort of stuff.
Oh God, that's going to be a week worth of episodes. That one, but it's pretty interesting. It highlights that the shareholders must be pretty confident based on that vote that the incumbent board are the ones that are going to get their money back to get it trading again.
Well, the best of two options.
Yeah, there.
Yeah. Or a few options, given a few people put themselves up. But
yeah, I don't know. I don't have good insight on whether the board's strategy is the right one or not. And sometimes when you're a shareholder, you kind of feel wedded to the decision you've already made. And but I do think, like, another takeaway I had going to this AGM is, like, a lot of the AVZ shareholders, like, we've only engaged with them on social media, and you kind of I had a preconception in my mind that a lot of these AVZ shareholders were a bit cultish, and they were just kind of blinded and all that sort of stuff. But going to the AGM, they're actually quite sensible and grounded and rational people who have done a lot more homework than I have on the story. And yes, they've got an incentive because but they just sounded a lot more logical than I thought in the lead up. So
did you chat to many shareholders?
Yeah, a couple. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Guys, should we get in a couple other votes?
We should, JD.
We
should, mate. Remuneration reports.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the ones that have been voted down. So as a
Not that it really means anything yet.
Yeah, well, as a quick reminder, you need 25% voting against to get your first strike, but nothing ultimately happens. So if that happens 2 years in a row, it leads to a spill ultimately, and that's essentially another vote to see what happens with the board.
So they vote on whether there's a board spill after their 2 strikes.
Yep.
Doesn't automatically spill the board, or do they?
No, there's a vote on a spill.
They vote on the spill.
Yeah, and we've got an example of that coming up. So we'll start with Fortescue. 52% of shareholders voted against the adoption of the REM report. So that's strike 1 for Fortescue.
So if they don't get a strike next year, then it resets.
Correct. It's got to be 2 consecutive years, yeah.
Yeah, so Poseidon, 79% voted against the REM report.
And that's after, remember, Peter Harold stepped down to non-executive director and cut his wage.
Well, he took in a big wage, then stepped aside.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's the 2nd consecutive year for Poseidon, so it triggered a board spill vote, which they narrowly avoided.
Yeah,
Yep.
wow.
Whitehaven, we've spoken about them in the past, 40% against them, so that's a strike.
There was obviously a bit of an activist campaign on that specific resolution of their AGM, but it is the 2nd in 3 years that they've had their REM their REM resolution voted against, but not in consecutive years, so it doesn't trigger a spill vote. There's some interesting things going on with the takeovers panel ruling on Bell Rock's undisclosed derivatives position in Whitehaven Coal, which we'll save that for a future episode, but we're following that one too.
And AVZ, as we touched on, 46 roughly, or maybe a touch over 46% voted against, so that's a strike for them.
Yep.
On the broader theme of, these votings, individuals getting out there and voting, I reckon we should make the call out for the money miners to go out and vote, or get online. You can do it. It's pretty late in this AGM season, but we talk all the time about incentives here. And if there's one thing you're going to do all year regarding a stock you've put your hard-earned money in, go and vote, because you get to see what the management are all about. You get to sort of size them up, and you can see, importantly, what their incentives are. You can, read through the notice of meeting, see what's being voted on, see how the short-term and the long-term incentives are structured, and you get a much better feeling for where you're putting your hard-earned money. So I think it's well worth your time to go and do that.
And you can talk to the management while you're there. That's it.
You can talk to the board. The board normally you never get a chance to, but you can bloody talk to them.
Exactly.
And you can get a scone and a coffee as well.
Blend 43 and a bloody savoury biscuit. But you get to actually talk to them.
Yeah.
So, and there's
super
no
important
such
thing
thing
to
as
do.
a dumb question there.
Yeah. It's like a really great function of corporate Australia is the ability to rock up in person, ask questions and advocate for, what you think should be a fairer run business at an AGM. Just go to one.
You'll be actually surprised. Don't be intimidated by it and think there's any stupid questions, because there's a lot of stupid people on boards as well. So don't be threatened. And you might actually walk out feeling pretty smart.
Absolutely. And if you're invested in a company that's trying to turn it all online, be seriously concerned, because these things need to happen both online and face-to-face.
One more thing while we're in the tail end of AGM season, there's still a week left of these. So if you see any really interesting resolutions, send them through to us. We'll do a wrap-up when AGMs are all over. We're particularly interested in, I reckon, 3 things. One being a big percentage of shareholders voting against board-recommended resolutions. Think, big termination rights packages getting pushed through, which would invest in a change of control, stuff like that. We're also interested in board spills, and we're also interested in any coincidental resignations from directors in the week prior to the AGM where they were up for re-election. So pay attention to the governance of your stocks and send in anything that looks interesting to us, and we'll probably include it.
Yeah, we did see a few. There was a few termination benefits voted yesterday on the back of performance rights that were issued, which obviously protects the holders of those if there's a change of control or a merger or a takeover or they get sacked. Yeah, Develop, Westgard, heap in De Grey, wasn't there, for all the directors?
Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting.
Yeah.
Guys, should we talk about some critical raw materials legislation?
Let's do it, mate.
Fuck, JD.
This is all you.
Strap yourself in.
Oh, mate, talk about pumped up.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
And if there's any ionic rare earths holders out there, this one will be of interest to you as well.
All right, JD, knock me socks off, Cobber.
So we've spoken about, we spoke most importantly with Rusty from Nero about the EU benchmarks as it relates to this Critical Raw Materials Act. And the EU has slowly been getting their act together and starting to, get this thing closer to being voted on. So in 2 weeks' time, it's going to be voted on. So we're talking about things like streamlining permitting, editing the critical minerals list, and, importantly, assessing how much mining is going to be done from within the EU, how much processing, and how much recycling. So when we spoke with Rusty, they had in the EU the target of 10% of mining to be done within the EU, 40% of processing, and 15% of recycling. That is of the EU's consumption.
So is that
by
saying
2030.
10% of the material has to have been mined in the EU? Is that what you're saying?
That they consume. Yeah, exactly. So what's changed here is that 15% of recycling of their consumed material has to be lifted to 25%. So that's, not an insignificant number. The permitting, this is also another one which I think would be pretty cool in Australia. They are capping the time frame for permitting a mining project at 27 months. It's still a relatively long period of time, but the idea of having a cap in place for how long the permitting process lasts is a pretty cool concept.
So that's saying if the government are piss farting around, come the 27-month mark, it just gets approved?
Well, it's not been voted on yet, but an answer needs to be, given back to the company within 27 months.
That makes such a big difference for financing because
So an answer has to be given.
yeah. It just like all of a sudden as a financier, you can have way more like certainty that you're going to get, your timeliness to cash flow is so much more predictable. That makes a huge difference to financing.
And on processing facilities and recycling projects, that's kept at 15 months, so 1 year shorter. They've also put an interesting measure in. They want to cap the max percentage that any of a particular strategic raw material can come from any one country, and that's at 65%. So you can't have more than 65% of whatever, say vanadium, coming from one country outside of the EU, and that's just to diversify their supply. So like I said,
is that limiting, like can't have 65% of the graphite coming out of China?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And how this sort of relates to Ionic, they've obviously got their Uganda project, but they've also got a recycling plant in Belfast, and that's going to get a big tailwind from these sorts of bits of legislation. So they want to run that 24/7 by January of next year. So that's pretty soon, and they've received some government support in the past. It's only a small operation, and demand for rare earth magnet materials isn't that great from within the EU at the moment anyway. But they'll be hoping that grows along with, the scale of their operation. So all that said, the Act is a pretty good sign for them for that, secondary part to their Ugandan project.
Oh, mate, that was actually pretty bloody interesting, JD. Fucking sensational.
Try to make it interesting for you, mate.
Cheers for that, mate. I really enjoyed that as a money miner.
Yeah. Speaking of things you're interested in.
Oh, mate. So, tell you what, it's the Bald Hill. Everyone's been wanting to know what the price tag was on it. We've got it here.
We do. And you wouldn't have found it from MinRes.
No, and it's a bit under the that's exactly what he said. It's immaterial. Yeah. And it's a bit well under the $1 billion that Elite shareholders thought it was worth.
Yeah, well under the $1 billion. So they paid $260 million all in. So it's essentially a $100 million sale price. Another 86 from that's going to go to Chinese groups Ostroid, who actually tried to take it out before FIRB blocked them, and Yihe, who are the offtake partner, as well as them paying for Lita's secured debt. That was a total of $74 million. So the transaction's now complete.
Mate, did the Elite shareholders make any other noise about this?
So, like you said, Matty, they were lobbying for a price closer to $1 billion than what they ended up getting, $260 million. So, as you'd expect, they're not awfully chuffed by it. The word was that there was over 10 bidders for this thing, and the obvious question is, why was there not a competitive bidding process in place? So, as you'd expect, that narrative was most vocally pushed by the Elite shareholders, but MinRes didn't even really give an announcement on this. It's hard to find stuff from Elite or Alliance Minerals, as it used to be called, now that they've been delisted from the Singapore Stock Exchange. So just in general, good information is pretty hard to come by, but I'm sure there's plenty of Elite shareholders that aren't awfully chuffed out there.
Benefits of being a big company. Geez, the amount of shit that becomes immaterial, isn't it?
That's right. So why don't we get into Bald Hill, the asset itself? There's all this fuss over it, but in terms of how it stacks up against other WA hard rock mines.
You want to know the difference? It's got a bloody mill. That's the only difference. And it's had this big status about it just because it's got a mill, but the spodgemene's pretty shit.
I think that the other important thing about Bald Hill is that offtake contract as well, which I think it's still ambiguous whether that offtake contract will
That's a juicy one. Yeah. So to your point, Matt, it's not been thought of as a great asset, and hence it went into receivership in 2019 because it just wasn't operating profitably at the time. Not to say if you perhaps ramp up production, you can get it operating profitably in the future. So if you look at the quarterly for the June quarter in 2019, the numbers were 39,000 wet metric tons produced of lithium con at 6.2%. The mined grade averaged 0.8%, which is not great. To your point, Matty, recoveries were 67% and cash costs were $770 per tonne. So that's $770 in 2019. You'd expect that as inflated a fair bit.
Yeah. So the mine grade's considerably lower than all the peers.
Yeah,
but well above 1%.
That grade wasn't reflective of what the actual reserve was. That's just what they'd been mining. So the strip ratio was still coming down. That was in the relatively early stages of the mine. And if you'd expanded the operation, you'd expect the unit costs to come down over time as well. So we'll see in future, what MinRes start reporting, what the actual costs look like at the operation. There's a red flag I'd point out as well. If you look at the old Alita/Alliance Minerals reports from the March quarter and the June quarter in 2019, they're pretty cagey on costs. If you just look on the surface, you think, hey, they're making a 30+% margin, and then you get into the actual cash flows and they're losing a lot of money. So just a warning for all investors out there, look at, what the actual cash position is looking like, especially in that phase of ramp up, because it's, vital when you're paying down debt and all these other things.
So it looks like if they were producing at $770 a tonne in 2019, and as you mentioned, the inflationary pressures, it sounds like it needs a lot more scale to it to really, because, over $100,000 costs at the moment are creeping towards the bloody price eventually.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to see what the actual numbers look like once MinRes have it operating, at a sustainable rate. But Ellison did say not too long ago that he thinks within 12 months they can scale it up from 150,000 tonnes per annum to 300,000 tonnes per annum. So that should have a pretty material impact. On the mill, that sits at 1.2 million tonnes per annum at the moment. So you'd expect them to scale that up too. And Trav, you mentioned the offtake agreement with Yeehee just before. That was a pretty controversial one. The gist of it was that the former owners were selling the lithium very cheaply to related parties. That was the accusation in China. And that was to avoid the standard 5% royalties that the Australian government or the WA government puts on these sorts of operations. So that still remains in place, and we'll see how that sort of plays out and whether that ultimately just falls by the wayside.
I think it's phenomenal business when you look at it, how they've picked this operation up for what you'd say pretty cheap, I think.
You would say that.
It's immaterial, so they haven't had to announce it. They get to expand it using all their in-house capability to put extra crushing and everything in, extra, whether it's flotation or not, but does all in-house without any external providers. You can tell you can see what the business is all about, the position they put themselves in.
And it's an asset with regional synergies. Compare that to, remember the independent expert valuation of Mount Catlin, which we looked into, I think, last week, and that was like US $590 million plus another 50 exploration upside is what an independent expert had valued Mount Catlin at, which doesn't really have regional synergies with other stuff. So appears a cheap acquisition on that.
Yeah, we'll see how it all fits in future. Just on the point of MinRes not making a comment on it, they did put out an announcement and they did speak about things like the royalty. But on the costing and that was immaterial. They say.
Where does it go? Like where does it go in the balance sheet? Like the acquisition, is the acquisition cost for it? It won't be its own line item. It gets put into all capital expenditure for MinRes. Where does it go?
Well, on the balance sheet, you'd just see a reduction in cash from MinRes as that goes out the door. And then depending on how the asset comes in, perhaps PP&E would go up for the mill, whatever they value that component at, and then the asset being the Bald Hill mine itself, that would fall into its own spot along with, the mines at Wodgina and those things and how they put them on the balance sheet normally there.
So can you see on the balance, will you be able to see on the cash flow statement?
Not specifically, no.
Because it's all in with everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we won't get an update on that for quite a while, given the time of year we're in now. By the time we see the balance sheet again, it'll be a bit in the future.
Yeah, they probably bought 2 or 3 other things by then, so it'll be all mashed in together.
That's it. One other thing to comment on, we spoke last week about the situation with First Quantum and Cobre Panama, one of the biggest copper mines in the world. So I just wanted to chuck in a quick comment on this one. We said at the time that First Quantum was still producing. That's now stopped. So the protesters have used boats to block the port that gets the copper out and all the deliverables into the mine. So nothing is coming out there anymore. That's 1.5% of the world's copper supply. So that's pretty significant. The Panamanian Supreme Court is meeting today, and they're going to start deliberating on the contract that First Quantum were awarded. And there was another interesting quote that they saw regarding the unions. The unions that, represent the mine workers have said that they want the mining the mining to start again and go ahead. So it's just interesting. It's just really hard to get a read on the social situation in Panama. But you can see, obviously, there's a lot of different opinions about what should be happening and what shouldn't be happening. So it's one we're just going to keep following.
Love your work, JD. Right, boys, next week and the weeks leading up to our cessation of podcasting for a month, I think we're going to mix it up a bit, hey?
Got a couple of interviews coming up next week.
We've got a couple of interviews. Yeah, we've got we've got Mr. Lithium coming back on for another yarn.
We do. That should
we're
be
going to go
All
balls deep
brine.
into lithium bar rock.
Yeah.
Like
ex-hard rock.
No rock lithium, which is everything else.
Yeah, it'd be
Which
super
is
fun.
gonna
We can
be-
talk about Exxon's deal. We can talk about everything going on in South America.
I reckon I'm going to do now. Money miners, get in touch, but don't make them too fucking hard. I want to talk about some operations that we never talk about that are massive in Australia. Yeah,
Mount Holland.
Boddington, Newmont's Cali, which is Tanami. Like, I think that's 700,000 ounces.
Cadia.
Never gets talked about because Cadia's. It's ones that don't get talked about because they're either listed somewhere else, or just they don't really get the limelight. Like Mount Holland because it's under the Wesfarmers banner.
We never talk about iron ore either.
Iron ore. Oh,
That's
Jesus
a good
Christ.
point. Let's look at.
Let me just start on the underground mines, and then we'll get maybe an iron ore expert in.
We should look at.
It's
Roy
all the
Hill.
same. Just there's
Roy
like
Hill would
3
be-
or 4
we
more
could,
zeros at the end of every single
Yeah,
number.
yeah. You know what would be a good one? Fella up the road from me works at the Rio Control Centre.
Yeah.
At that'd be a good insight too to get into how the trains and shipping and logistics and blends and everything work.
Yeah, it's all economies of
I've
scale
had
up
heaps of
there.
drunk chats with him that I don't remember, so it'd be better to Oh,
We
mate.
get him, and then we get Gina on, and
Yeah.
it'll all be happening.
I'll send a message to Hancock yesterday.
Going to come
Put
here,
a
I
call
believe.
it. Do you want to know the wording? It
you-
was like, oi, what do you reckon about the biggest mining media agency in the world and Gina Reinhardt having an off-the-record yarn?
I might
Give
as well
us a
put that-
buzz.
I might as well put that in the calendar already.
Mate,
then.
I think it's pretty much locked in, and I think my accent was attached to it.
Let me know when you head back.
Yeah, I will. Get in touch, Hancock.
All right, we've got a couple of sponsors to
Oh,
thank,
mate,
gents.
JD, I reckon you laid it away. I like it when you do it.
Got DCI Underground, Terra Capital.
That's not their name, JD.
ESR.
DSI.
I say.
DCR.
DCI. There might be a DCI.
Yeah,
It might be a competitor.
You know how the reading goes. DSI Underground, Terra Capital, McMahon Mining Title Services, Future Proof Consulting, Anytime Exploration Services, KCA Site Services, JP Search, Brooks Airways, and K-Drill.
Oh, I love it, boys. Have a good weekend, money miners.
Hootaroo.
Hootaroo.
The information contained in this episode of Money of Mine is of general nature only and does not take into account the objectives, financial situation or needs of any particular person. Before making any investment decision, you should consult with your financial advisor and consider how appropriate the advice is to your objectives, financial situation and needs.